Hello and welcome to this week's episode, which is episode number 10 and a half. That sounds a bit like a Harry Potter train station, I'll admit, but I needed to go back and finish up a certain series of consoles. Last week's episode was number 84, and we looked at the Game Boy Advance SP. Today we go back all the way to 1980 and look at a home games console that rounded out the Genesis First Edition systems for Nintendo, called simply, the Computer TV Game. This system has an interesting background and arrived at the very end of the relatively successful Color Computer TV Game series of first-generation systems from Nintendo. The release date of 1980 for today's Star in Focus coincides with Nintendo's first release ever of a Game & Watch handheld, so this year is clearly a milestone year in their history. But before we get to grips with this rare and expensive console, let's look back at last week's photo quiz question that we on this channel call What in the World? I'd hoped that the obscurity of this Club Nintendo item might have made this a difficult product to guess, but one viewer knew immediately what this was. And it is also an interesting item. Club Nintendo of Japan issued a VIP Famicom Player 2 faceplate for the Game Boy Micro, but added a full-size, metal-housed, non-working dummy unit to present it to its customers. This is an expensive and somewhat rare item to locate today. But all credit should go to our friend Emilio, who knew what this item was, the moment episode 84 dropped, and that was a darned impressive feat of knowledge, so congratulations and thanks for playing along. Looking at the timeline for the first generation of Nintendo consoles from 1977 through to 1980, we see this included today's focus, the Computer TV Game unit. All of these first-gen systems were purely Japanese releases, and for added fun, and as a comparison, I'll add their retail purchase price for each model. So first up, and from episode 7, we have the Color TV Game 6, which in 1977 cost 9,800 yen. Then we get the unthrottled version, reviewed in episode 8 and also from 1977, the Color TV Game 15, ironically costing 15,000 yen. In 1978 a new and dynamic console arrived, called the Color TV Game Racing 112. This console cost a measly 5,000 yen. We covered this in episode 9. The following year, 1979, and in episode 10, we looked at the last Color TV game, Block Kazushi, or Breakout. This initially retailed for 13,500 yen. And now we arrive back to today's Star in Focus, the Computer TV Game, loaded with a single game, Othello. This console was advertised for a whopping 48,000 yen. This, the final first-generation Nintendo console, the Computer TV Game, was, as previously mentioned, released in 1980, but even upon its release, these dedicated, single-game consoles were decreasing in public popularity. Couple that to the horrendous initial 48,000 yen price tag, and you can see why the Computer TV Game was only produced in extremely limited quantities, therefore making it by far the rarest of this first generation of systems. Nintendo's Miyamoto once again designed the system's white-colored casing and the packaging, sporting, for only the second time, the Nintendo logo on its case. It was produced in-house, that is internally by Nintendo's R&D1. The Computer TV Game contains a previously used version of Computer Othello, as it's built around an original Computer Othello arcade system, and in fact contains the very same board that was released 2 years prior, back in 1978. And my best guess as to why this first-generation home games console was never actually branded as a Color TV Game, was simply because of the use of its monochrome screen display. This restriction of color led the development team to dispatch with the normal style of playing counters, and to use the square and the plus symbol to identify, or differentiate each player. Computer Othello is an important arcade video game, and we know it was released in 1978 and exclusively in Japan. It is important, and deserves its place in Nintendo's history because it was the first video game both published and developed by Nintendo, and also, the first game developed by Nintendo's own R&D1. While not the first video game Nintendo was involved with, we all know of earlier systems, however they were always joint ventures. The arcade system still makes its mark on the company's legacy for the various reasons listed above. The use of the plus symbol and squares, chosen for this version of Othello, is likely due in some part, in attempting to distancing itself from what might be seen as the near-identical X's and circles used in computer tic-tac-toe, or noughts and crosses, as this computer game was already established and was actually in existence, debuting way back in 1959. The Computer Othello arcade games table proved quite popular. It allowed for the choice of either one person to play the game Othello, also known as reversi, against a computer opponent, much like the early chess systems did, or it was also possible, and more likely that two people would play, in a head-to-head type of match, as in a direct competition. We've previously mentioned that the motherboard from the arcade system was repurposed into this home game system. This obviously gave the computer TV game a genuine arcade feel, but it was also a big drain on the electrical supply. The power block that was included in the original packaging weighed a massive 2 kilograms on its own. Such was the difficulties of repurposing surplus, and if we're honest, obsolete arcade games into home units. Therefore the CRT screen would have looked exactly the same as the arcade version. It's an easy enough game to understand. Every move, you can flip an opponent's piece or a chain of them, be it vertical, or horizontal, or even diagonal, to your square or cross, by placing a piece, or counter of your own, so you've got a piece on each side of the chain. These can go in any direction, but you always have to turn every opposing piece you can. If you have no such move possible, and this actually happens, you must press the pass button. If you have only one such move, you must make it, even if it is very bad. Ideally you should attempt to get one of the corners. From there you can take a whole side of the board, and from that position it can't be flipped. This way you can expand that territory in relative safety. It's quite possible for a game to swing from, say, 40 to 10, to say 10 to 54 very quickly. But the monochrome display was dated even in 1980. Just look at how vibrant the screens were from the rest of the color TV game series. They look like they're a generation ahead, and not the predecessors that they actually are. Suffice to say, the computer TV game was not a retail success, yet that rarity has catapulted this console into legendary status, with price tags to match. The technology likely wasn't really ready for this kind of commercial home release, but spurred on by the success of the arcade over the past 2 years, Nintendo went ahead and released it anyway, ultimately believing there would be a market for it. Even the name, computer TV game, is pretty generic, for a machine that can only play Othello. The image on the front of the retail box gives a hint in the direction of what you're actually in for, as it shows an Othello game in progress, but lacks the promise the price tag suggests. The top flaps of the box can be folded, so it can be carried in a more convenient way, and this design twerk is no real luxury, as it is a big and heavy system to carry around. There are 2 areas on the left and right hand side of the console. These are the 2 player control areas. You'll see that there are both orange and blue buttons, with these being repeated on both the left and right sides, with the right side being allocated to player 1 and the left side is for player 2. The small orange buttons move the on-screen cursor, the larger orange button at the bottom confirms a player's selection, and the blue one at the top allows a player to pass. The buttons in the middle of the unit are used to select the game type and the difficulty levels, single player, playing the computer, or the 2-player choice. With the central buttons the game type is selected. Option A and B are head-to-head games for 2 players, option C and D are games against the computer. Note how the options are read from right to left, in the traditional Japanese way. This indicates that this is a serious game, not merely a child's toy. So between 1977 and 1979 4 games were released in the color TV game series. Then the 5th game from that first generation of consoles was released in 1980, called the computer TV game, and it was given the production code of CTG-HC10. This system finished up the first generation consoles, which were ultimately replaced by the Family Computer, or Famicom, in 1983. Although the 4 color TV games from this series were commercially successful, albeit only domestically, and obviously we mean Japan, Nintendo, however, was less successful with its other ventures around this period. It tried its luck with such diverse things as moving into toys and physical games, puzzles, taxis and hotels, all of which were not really that successful commercially. So it is somewhat surprising that initially Nintendo did not put too much effort into their early attempts at arcade and home console gaming and development, as they really never attempted to create a discernible video gaming experience unique to themselves, as for the most part, these early machines merely adopted concepts developed by the likes of Magnavox and Atari, and at this stage, Nintendo added very little effort or imagination into their fledgling products. That was until they saw it was paying off. Then from that point forward they made it a company policy to add uniqueness, but also they made it a policy to never again sell any game system they made at a loss. Add to that their adoption a little later of their seal of quality, and well, the modern Nintendo company was born. Othello has remained a reliable and steadfast games choice throughout the multiple and various generations of Nintendo consoles. We've already seen the Famicom version, and here we see the variant that was ported over to the Nintendo Entertainment System. Handhelds were not exempt, even the original Game Boy got its own version, and if memory serves me right, this was the game I played the most back then, with the hours spent on that game far exceeding even Tetris. So with Othello persisting as a staple games offering, right up to the present day, perhaps the computer TV game was not such a crazy choice after all. And on that bombshell, we've just about finished up this episode with our weekly photo quiz question, where we puzzle over a partial picture of a Nintendo item and you guys get the chance to hazard a guess. Well, here's today's challenge, and as you can see, the Nintendo logo is situated just above the screen, so do you have any ideas? If you do, feel free to drop a comment in the section below, or even if it's just to say hi, but to see what the What in the World item shown is, simply tune into our next episode and we will reveal the full image. I'm taking a short vacation for a couple of weeks, and I offer the season's very best wishes to each and everyone. Please try and stay safe and hopefully happy, and we'll be back early next year with a new and exciting episode, so stay tuned. I'd ask for anyone that's still listening to hit that like button, give us a thumbs up. The likes on my episodes get taken down a lot with all the perpetual down voting I receive, so appreciate any help you feel you can offer. As always, feel free to follow and subscribe, but most of all I'd just like to thank you for just being here, and sharing this journey. Happy New Year to all of you.